48% of all black families have lived in poor neighborhoods for over 2 generations, compared to 7% of white families. If a child grows up in a poor neighborhood, moving up and out to a middle-class area is typical for whites, but an aberration for blacks. Black neighborhood poverty is more multi-generational. White neighborhood poverty is more episodic. The implications for children's success are dramatic. Sharkey calculates that living in poor neighborhoods over 2 consecutive generations reduces children's cognitive skills by the equivalent of missing 2 to 4 years of schooling. Segregated schools with poorly performing students cannot be turned around while remaining racially isolated. And the racial isolation of schools cannot be remedied without undoing the racial isolation of the neighborhoods in which they're located. It's generally accepted today, even by sophisticated policymakers, that black students' residential isolation is now de facto the accident of demographic change, income inequality, personal preferences, and so on. But this is a dubious proposition. In truth, residential segregation exists because of 20th century federal, state, and local policies explicitly designed to separate the races and whose effects endure today. The federal government led in the establishment and maintenance of residential segregation. From its New Deal inception, federally funded public housing was explicitly segregated, both by federal and local governments. Not only in the South, but in the Northeast, Midwest, and West, projects were officially and publicly designated either for whites or for blacks. Later, as white families left the projects for the suburbs, most public housing was explicitly placed only in black neighborhoods to ensure the concentration of low-income populations. This was de jure, not de facto segregation. Once material was freed for post-war civilian construction, the federal government subsidized the relocation of whites to suburbs and prohibited similar relocation of blacks. Again, this was an explicit racial policy. The Federal Housing and Veterans Administrations recruited a nationwide cadre of mass production builders who constructed developments on the East Coast like the Levittowns, on the West Coast like Lakeview and Panorama City in Los Angeles area, or Daly City in San Francisco, and in numerous other metropolises in between. These builders received federal loan guarantees on explicit condition that no sales be made to African Americans and that each deed include a prohibition on resales to blacks.